Have you ever had a bill coming due that you weren't sure how you were going to pay it? The anxiety and stress that it creates is a mystery indeed, and definitely not one I want to be a part of, right? Bible Sleuth here, and I'm on another mysterious parable adventure from the Bible. In Luke 7:36-50, we find a story where a Pharisee invited Jesus to eat at his house. The events that unfolded spawned a straightforward parable with a mysterious explanation. Let's go to the scene in Luke 7:36-47 to investigate this parable of unequal debts and the mysteries and peculiar characters surrounding it. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city, who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head and kissed his feet and anointed them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. Okay, I've got to stop and ask, why did the Pharisee invite Jesus to eat with him? Could he have possibly been suspicious if Jesus was the Messiah and wanted to see if he could prove it through this invitation? Anyway, let's get back to the scene. And Jesus answering said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, say it, teacher. Okay, wait a minute. I got to do it again. For a second, just a second, and point out that aside from Jesus, two characters are there. An unnamed woman of the city and a Pharisee by the name of Simon. Why is Simon named? I sure don't know. So let's move on to the parable. A certain moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Then turning to the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with this ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little. So that's the story and the parable, but I have to say this whole event brings up some questions that I think could add to the meaning of what Jesus said. The following question may not have any answer that can be determined in the scripture, but I can't help wondering how the woman knew Jesus was eating at Simon's house. You might ask, does that really have any importance? Well, probably not, but it might supply some insight into her mystery, because I don't really have any questions about the parable. I do think the characters provide a certain amount of mystery, which also includes the mystery surrounding Jesus's explanation. For example, Simon. As I asked before, why did Luke specify him by name? And of course, there is the woman who was a sinner and unnamed. The woman was truly broken, but there seemed to be more to it than that versus her seemingly obvious reputation. There was something that drew her to that house like a magnet. So I'm going to take a bit of license here concerning her. The woman was more than likely familiar with the law and probably had it crammed down her throat all of her life, yet she was still falling short. So she was quite aware of her spiritual condition, but can't we all identify with falling short? I also find it interesting that she was a known sinner. Notice too, Luke didn't identify her with a specific sin either, which makes me wonder. The fact that she was known by the Pharisees may speak an unpleasant truth about them. They knew exactly who she was. A very similar situation occurred when a woman who was caught in adultery was thrown down roughly at Jesus' feet. The accusers held stones in their hand with a question of what should be done with her, because according to the law, she should have been stoned to death. But maybe you're asking the same question that I am. Why was it just the woman being stoned and not the other person who was also guilty? They were trying to trap Jesus in the law. However, need somebody be reminded? Jesus' knowledge of the law was way beyond the leader's understanding. He was an author of it. Remember? Jesus just knelt down and wrote in the dirt. He didn't even look up at her or her accusers as he said, "The one with no sin may cast the first stone." He said that while continuing to write in the dirt. Notice that this woman is identified by her sin. Okay, back to the woman at Simon's supper. She had something that the Pharisees didn't have. She believed that Jesus was the Messiah and not just a prophet. She knew he was going to make things right. Now let's contrast that with Simon, just as Jesus did. It's easy to see that he didn't even consider Jesus a prophet. If this man were a prophet, there was a deep conviction on the woman's life, and she knew she was guilty of sin and was thoroughly broken and in need of a savior. Of course, it's possible she was overcome with gratitude because she had already found healing and forgiveness earlier, but needed Jesus' confirmation. So back to that, how did she find out where Jesus was eating? Well, the Bible doesn't say how she knew. Maybe she had been following Jesus, or maybe she had heard it from Simon or others. Regardless, she needed to see him at the personal expense of shame and hurt that would be cast at her. Another question is, what if she was familiar with Simon's house? Not as a place that she only knew of, but someplace she'd actually been. Do you think it was strange that she just appeared on the scene and wasn't shooed away? You know, that has always baffled me. Jesus reads into the whole scene knowing that the group was disgusted by his response to this lady, and the fact that because she was probably unclean and touching him made him ceremonially unclean too. So said the rabbinical law. I find it interesting that the absence of washing before eating was mentioned here. According to the halakha, which is the collective body of Jewish religious laws that are derived from the written Torah, biblical commandments or mitzvah, subsequent Talmudic and rabbinical laws, it requires that hands to be washed before eating a meal with bread made from one of the 5 chief grains. Also, a blessing was to be pronounced while doing this. We are back to the law. But remember the Last Supper when Jesus washed the disciples' feet? Peter would not allow him to do it at first. But look what happened in John 13, 6-10. Jesus came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" And Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "The one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean." I'm kind of thinking there was a triple meaning that Jesus was talking about. The spiritual cleansing, the example of humility that he was showing, and actual physical cleaning of dusty feet. Notice he did not wash Peter's hands. But let's go back to Simon's house. As far as the woman being shooed away, I'm wondering if it was a setup on the part of Simon, as a means to prove or disprove Jesus' authenticity. I almost see this being a strong possibility. The woman's desire to see Jesus lent for a perfect opportunity to accomplish that. Of course, these are just theories that I'm proposing, and there is little evidence to support it, mind you. Jesus knew their thoughts and pointed out customs of the day in the explanation. As my mind's eye looks into this scene, I see a woman extremely humbled and giving Jesus probably one of her most valuable possessions. This was not the only scene where this is recorded of that happening. Some may argue that it was the same event as when Mary from Bethany performed the same act. But John 11:2 identifies Mary, being Lazarus' sister, as the one who anointed Jesus' feet and dried them with her hair. One chapter over is where that happened, and there is a difference. Could Mary of Magdala have been this woman? It is possible. Wait, right? Mary from Bethany? Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus? There were at least three. The woman at Simon's house anointed Jesus' feet with her tears, while Mary from Bethany anointed his feet with spikenard. The gal at Simon's house was not named. For her, it was more than likely out of overwhelming grief or possibly thankfulness, considering what Jesus said to her. Mary of Bethany had listened to Jesus and helped supply for his and the disciples' needs. This was also true of Mary Magdalene as well. They got what Jesus was saying. In our parable, Jesus' feet had not been washed and may have been dirty from walking, so the tears possibly could have created streaks of mud. One thing to point out is that the woman stepped into the role of servant, and Jesus honored that. Let's look at Simon. Simon's name was mentioned twice, which I find interesting. I also find it interesting that there seemed to be an edge to his reply to Jesus after hearing the parable and the question of who would love the creditor more.
I suppose.
The word used here for suppose in the Greek is to assume or take it up as in the mind. It was almost an, I know where you're going with this,
But I don't want to hear it.
In Simon's defense, when it comes to humility, it's not natural for our self-centered lives to want to hear that we should humble ourselves. Jesus knew that because of the contrast he made between the woman and Simon specifically. However, another possibility was that this was indeed Mary Magdalene, from which Jesus had driven 7 demons. This theory would support that when she showed up, her presence actually scared the Pharisees, not knowing that Jesus may have already healed her. Regardless of who she was or how she came to be there, she provides an example for the power to forgive sins and how love is intertwined in that, and so connecting love to humility. So Jesus used their own hospitality customs to really demonstrate that. Though Simon invited Jesus into his home, he skipped the standard hospitality usually afforded a guest. In fact, it would seem that Simon blatantly committed at least 2 insults against Jesus. The first, it is customary to greet a guest with a bow and a kiss on the cheek and tap on the shoulder. While doing this, one is to proclaim that while in the house belongs to the guest. Also, because of the type of footwear worn and the fact that travel meant walking through dust, dirt, mud, the hospitable thing would have been to have the guest's feet washed by a servant. The omission of these customs seemed to be a clear and intended insult. Jesus went in, sat at meat, or reclined at the table. It is interesting now that Luke specified this entrance. The other custom, which was not identified by Jesus, was the greater insult. In that day, to be invited into a house to share a meal was a type of covenant of friendship. To share a meal with a guest and then betray that person was the ultimate insult. Now, does that sound familiar? Jesus would endure such an insult by someone closer to him later. Remember, it was Judas who dipped his bread in the cup with Jesus and then went out and betrayed his whereabouts. Look at Proverbs 23:6-7. Do not eat the food of a begrudging host. Do not crave his delicacies. It goes on to say that the one who does eat will vomit it up and null the compliments that were given. As far as Jesus contrasting the two characters, the word love was used. Who would love more? Okay, just a side note. I do want to say that one possible reason that Simon was named could be that he may have become a convert and heard what Jesus was saying. I know I sure hope so. The response of the woman is humbling. As I ponder how we should respond to Jesus, how I should respond to Jesus, we should know he is the Messiah and will make things right. I don't know about you, but I'm in desperate need of Jesus making things right in my life.